We're a couple of minutes early, but I guess we can go ahead and start. It's 1:58, and we promised you a Facebook Live Q&A session. Hello, parents. My name is Tim Waller, and I work for Greenville County Schools. Jeff McCoy is here, and he is the Associate Superintendent for Academics. And I like to refer to you as the busiest guy in school business right now, but I know you would say that a lot of other people are busy as well, Jeff. Wow, so we rolled out the long-awaited final back-to-school plan this morning to parents and reporters and all stakeholders out there in the community. And I think one thing we made clear about this plan, it is not the attendance plan for when, the first day of school, the first week of school, because we don't know what the conditions will be. But thank you for coming back here. This is your second round in the in the Facebook Live realm here at Greenville County Schools. And keeping in mind Jeff's title, we're going to try to stick to all things academic today. I mean, Jeff can answer about any question you have, and he's willing to do so. But really, Jeff's specialty, as we learned last week, is all things academics, from the traditional in-person classrooms to the new virtual program. And he's a wealth of information. We know a lot of parents have been submitting questions in advance, so all right, first of all, and this is something we've all talked about quite a bit, and that's the new roadmap plan, the flexible in-person attendance plan. And it's the one where if you look at the chart, your first reaction, I think, is this utter confusion, but then you take a breath and then you study it for a minute, then it starts to make sense pretty fast. So here's the question about this flexible plan. Will requests be guaranteed for families with multiple last names? Because remember, the whole color coding thing is based on the first letter of the last name.
Correct.
What's your answer to that?
Yeah, so some parents have already started completing the form. With that document was released a form that parents can complete or fill out if they do happen to need a day change or a color change. And so we've already been receiving, I think we've got about 500 or 600 of those requests already changed. I mean, it's come in. So our team will be working through that over the next couple of weeks to be able to make those changes. We do have to balance to make sure that when we make a change, we can still social distance on the bus if we're on the one-day plan or the two-day plan. But our team will be pouring for those requests, and then they'll notify parents once that change has been completed if they're able to accommodate it.
Is it, Jeff, safe to say that you would encourage parents to really only make that request if absolutely needed, because it's a complicated process?
Yeah, it is complicated just because we do have to balance the day. We have to balance the classrooms to make sure we don't have 20 kids in one classroom and 6 in another on those days. So we would ask that you make the change based on transportation issues or childcare issues or some legitimate issue like that.
Sure. Great. All right, we have another question. How far in advance will we know what the schedule will be for a particular week? And when will the schedule for a week be announced?
So ideally, we would do that 1 to 2 weeks out. We're following, as you mentioned before, the DHEC guidelines for how many, where we are as far as the 3 categories of high, medium, or low. And so we take those into consideration when we're looking at what plan we will follow. So ideally, we would be doing 1 to 2 weeks out prior to the next week, so parents have time to know which schedule we're going to follow.
Tell me if this is a fair statement. I've said this in a few TV interviews in particular, but I've told reporters that we don't really expect these wild swings from one extreme to the other week after week to where no one can plan for the next week.
Yeah, so I think the graphic is a roadmap, so ideally we would be moving towards that 5-day full attendance plan, and ideally it would work in those increments. It may not always depend upon the high spread, but you're right, we wouldn't be announcing something Sunday night for something to change on Monday. That was a little bit different from the spring when the governor made the decree to close school. Right. So unless something happens like that again, we would give parents notice so that they could make appropriate plans. Yeah,
absolutely. Great. How far in advance will we know what the schedule will be for a particular? Okay, let's go to another question, because I think we just kind of touched on that. All right. What if a student shows up on the wrong day?
So we do ask that the parents adhere to the color schedule unless you've made a request and we've changed the color for the day. We are going to try to make that easy with schools. Assistant superintendents right now are working to do some sort of tagging system where the tags are color coded, so we know that there's kids showing up are actually on the right day. So that, again, we can appropriately balance those classrooms.
And I think there was a second part of that question. How will students attending on their day only be enforced? I mean, I guess teachers will know who
Yes.
should be there?
So based on those tags, we would have rosters by day. So we know who's supposed to be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if we're on the 1 day a week or if we're on the 2 day a week. So we know what rosters and who's supposed to be there.
Okay. Now, Tammy, thank you, Tammy, for writing in this question. If school is 1 day a week in person, can you ask to switch for carpooling purposes?
Yes, so that would be one of those reasons we would want you to go ahead and complete that form. So if you are working together with in your neighborhood or within your community to do some carpooling with other families, take 1 day a week or whatever, then we would just ask that you fill that form out so we can process that request.
Because we definitely understand and appreciate transportation needs. That's a big deal for parents. Great.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about virtual program now. That has been almost the topic ever since Greenville County Schools announced it. Vanessa has written in, how will the 5-year-old kindergarten virtual program work? Because these are little kids.
Yes. So we've released a schedule online. That schedule is basically in 30-minute blocks. Within that 30-minute block is very flexible. So a kindergarten teacher is not going to be teaching live to a kindergarten for 30 minutes. The teacher's going to have a lot of flexibility. They may do a live lesson with a kid for 10 minutes of a kindergarten, and then they may let them work independently, and she may pull smaller groups of kindergarten students, or one-on-one even, to work with kindergarten students. So we are very being cognizant of screen time to make sure that the kids aren't on from 7:45 in the morning till 2:15. So there's going to be a lot of breaks in there, and related arts and other breaks that students will take. And then, like I said, even though it may say 30 minutes math lesson, it's not going to be for kindergarten a 30-minute math lesson.
Yeah, wow, okay. That makes sense. Kelly, thank you, Kelly, for writing in. Any idea on the K-4 program? It isn't offered virtually, but if we go back to a hybrid schedule, will K-4 exist?
Yeah, so K-4 would still exist on a hybrid schedule. So if we were on a 1 day or 2 day a week, we would still be doing e-learning with the 4K students on those days. It's just virtual is very difficult to do for a full year for 4K students because a lot of reasons. But certainly temporarily with the e-learning, we would do e-learning with 4K students.
Okay. And, this is kind of a side question, but when we talk about this young group of kids, they're going to have Chromebooks.
Correct.
This year.
Yes, we will have all students grades 4K to 12th grade will have Chromebooks this year.
Wow. That's a game changer.
For the younger ones, yes.
For the younger ones, right. All right. Parents who need help with their K-5 and first grade students, especially if it's going to be virtual, because we know whether they're staying at home, whether they're working, juggling schedules, a lot of times help is required. So most kindergarten student parents that this person who wrote in the question has spoken with had children who were having daily, hourly meltdowns at home, just trying to get their work done, their schoolwork accomplished. How do you plan to help parents of younger students better in the fall compared to what we saw in that e-learning?
So that was one of the challenges with not having Chromebooks last year. We were limited on what we could do with the paper. We did the packets and all of that, but not having the ability to do a live stream with the younger students did limit us a little bit, which is why we're providing Chromebooks for 4K to 12. So if you look at that virtual schedule, you'll see again that teachers throughout the day are doing live sessions with their kindergarten students. So that way, if when it's math lesson time, as the teacher, I'm doing a Google Meet session with you. So I'm helping you with the math now instead of maybe the parent having to teach the math and work solely with the child from those 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it happens to be. So the live sessions for the younger students will look very different this year because of the Chromebooks.
You've taken a lot of feedback too, based on what happened in the spring, and just you've improved on that.
Correct.
Yep.
Yes, sir. So that's and I think for the younger grades, they would tell you that the being able to do live meet session with their students for them, they're very excited about because that was the one component missing in the spring.
Okay, good. All right, Brandy has written in with her question. If I have advanced classes or ones that would normally need to be in person, would I be taken out of those classes if I did the virtual program?
No, so we're planning on offering as many courses in the virtual program as we can, including AP courses, IB courses, The high schools, if I'm not sure what grade she was in, middle school or high school, but high school level, they're working that out within their own high schools. And so they are, if for some reason that course cannot be offered virtually, let's say, then the counselor would contact the student and let them know, and they could make another course selection, or if they chose to, they could actually go in on campus for that one class. If it was a small class and they wanted to attend it, they could actually do that as well.
And it sounds like the theme that I'm hearing is, while there are some set rules of how this is all going to work, you understand a lot of situations may arise, and there's a lot of flexibility here.
There is, particularly with classes that there may be dual enrollment classes. Is another question that Christy asked about, will they be offered virtually? Greenville Tech obviously is our partner in most of our dual credit classes. As you know, they've moved a lot of their classes online for this fall. And so, yes, we'll offer dual credits online in the virtual program, as well as for those students who may be taking it at school on a 1 day or 2 day, we'll still accommodate that as well.
Good.
And and it's very similarly related to Liam, is Gifted and Talented being offered. We are offering Gifted and Talented programming in the virtual program. So grades 2 through 8 will still have their virtual program, gifted virtual program, and then high school, of course, we're offering, as I talked about already, honors and AP, which would fall into the gifted category.
And that is the first time I've heard any talk about the gifted program. I'm glad you said that, so if that question comes up to me later, I now know what to say.
Still accommodating, yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. All right. Burchetta has asked the question, how are high school labs going to happen if we're doing this virtually?
So I'm assuming high school, high school labs, right? Yes, high school labs. Middle school and high school labs, actually, we are making accommodations for them. We actually do have quite a few virtual labs that we've been using through software that we've procured many, many years ago. So a lot of those we are still doing virtually or online. But we are also looking at, is it possible to bring in students, even on a Saturday possibly, a couple days throughout the year, if there was some labs in certain courses like chemistry. Chemistry is very hard to replicate at home virtually. So looking at how do we meet those standards. So could we bring students in small groups, social distance and all that, to be able to still accommodate and have some of that hands-on experience with the labs.
That's great. Awesome. Nicole has written in, will middle school, or all students for that matter, still be able to take strings online?
Yeah, so obviously doing strings, band, orchestra, any of that online is going to look a lot different than it does in class. So yeah, they can still do it. We're still proposing that it be offered online. A lot of parents have asked if they can just have their kid at school for strings or band or orchestra, and that's certainly an option because it is going to be very different in an online environment, so by yourself, so to speak. But certainly parents can choose the option to go into school and do that class, or they can choose to do it online if they feel more safe that way.
Oh, wow. Here's another one. Will internet be provided for students who don't have access at home? That was an issue in the spring. What about now?
Yeah, so the state has launched a program that is providing some mobile hotspots. So if a child is on, or a family is on free and reduced lunch, then they can talk to their school principal, and we will work on getting them an access point or a hotspot, MiFi hotspot, so they can do that work at home through the hotspot. That's
great. That is great news. Will students who choose online learning be provided a computer or Chromebook? And I think you addressed that. Will it be sanitized when it's handed over to them?
Yeah, so our ETS technicians all summer have been working very hard to get, I think it was somewhere around 8,000 Chromebooks repaired and little things that have to be done to them. So they've been working on getting that done, and the new ones coming in that we have to do for 4K to second grade. So yeah, they'll be sanitized. They'll be ready to go for students when they're handed out. So they're all ready to go with students.
And I should reiterate that if parents are just joining us, I mean, we discussed a little while ago, what's different this year is literally 4K all the way through grades 12. Correct. Everybody gets a Chromebook this year.
Correct.
So that's great news. Is there a separate supply list for students attending the virtual school option, and then when and how will they receive that list for the students?
Yeah, so there will be a separate supply list. There will be some manipulatives depending upon the grade the teachers will have to have, and parents will have to have at home. So we're preparing those now. That we hope to have those released by next week for parents, so they have time to get those items if they don't have them. In some cases, we're actually creating things that they can just cut out if they choose to do that instead to use as manipulatives. But there will be a supply list, just very traditionally like there would be at a regular brick and mortar school.
Sure, that's great. All right. Andrea has written in, is the online option, and I guess she's talking virtual program, something that can be done at the student's own pace? And will the student have to be in class like regular school hours, or can they watch it really anytime they please? How does that work?
So within a day, they can watch it and do the work kind of anytime they please, so to speak. Elementary is a little different. We do request the parents are live for the reading block because that's not something we can really record because it's done in small groups based on that child's individual reading level. So it's a very interactive session, so that would be very difficult to do, to record and watch later. So we do ask for that session that parents have at least availability to do that, or the child has availability to do that. But for everything else, if they can't be live at 1 o'clock for the math lesson, that's going to be recorded so they can watch it later. Or some of those parents who've said, is it okay if I do my work with my child later at night? That's certainly fine too. They do need to log in though every day and work every day. We are still under attendance guidelines, and so that is how those child's attendance will be recorded, is if they are logging in and working every day, unless they make some other arrangements with the teacher for some reason. And
to reiterate something you told me earlier, when we talk about virtual program, this is like regular school, but done virtually, and by that I mean new course content, grading standards that count.
Correct.
Yeah, live lectures recorded for later review.
Yes.
And that's great, and that's really the big difference between what we saw in the spring.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So yeah, the attendance, we don't know if the state may come out with additional attendance policies for virtual students. We are waiting on that guidance, but for right now, we've defined that as long as students log in each day and work each day, then we'll count them as present.
Good. All right, Jen has a question. Are students expected to be supervised by an adult physically while they're on a video call with a teacher?
So we don't, parents certainly does not need to be sitting there with them side by side. We actually prefer that the kids have that time actually with the class by themselves. Certainly the parent can be in, somewhere else in the house or working or doing whatever, but we do ask that the kids, have the time with the teacher and the rest of the class kind of, by themselves, or they're working independently from the parent in that regard.
Okay, good. Sean has a question. How will parents who work until 6 p.m. be able to participate in virtual conferences?
So we can, if that's an issue as far as not being able to do a parent conference during the day, the one benefit we do have with virtual is that we can make accommodations. We're not having to physically be at a school at 6 o'clock p.m. or 7 o'clock p.m. Like maybe brick and mortar. So teachers, that would just need to be something that's arranged with the teacher ahead of time to say, is it possible for me to do a conference with you at 6, I work, or whatever it happens to be. And we'll be as flexible as possible with that. Our teachers will have normal office hours as well during the day. There will be a block as an office hour. And that's really for any parent that has a question or a parent conference or whatever meeting has to happen, that they have the freedom to be able to schedule that with the teacher.
That is good to know. Okay, good. Katrina has asked, if we choose the in-person school, will students still receive virtual instruction by their teacher on the e-learning days, or will it be more like worksheets and activities on their own, or up to parent guidance?
So if it's in the 100% e-learning block where all kids are at home e-learning, then the teachers would look very much like the virtual program. So they'd be doing live lessons throughout the day. They'd be working with kids in small groups throughout the day or individually throughout the day. If we're on that 1 or 2 day attendance block, teachers again are actually teaching kids 4 days a week, and so they would check in with kids on that 45-minute planning period, 30-minute planning period that they have, and they would provide the activities for the kids to do at home as well. But they would not be available from 7:45 to 2:15 because they are teaching students.
Okay, good answer. Bonnie has a question. Can students in the virtual program return to school in January? So they start off virtual. If they don't like it, can they go back in January? And also, what kind of curriculum or assignments will be expected, and how many hours will they have to sit in front of the computer every day? And then the fourth prong to this question, can students choose what time to do their schoolwork, which I think you kind of talked about there.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask Lisa to leave that question up just so I can see all 4 prompts there, since it had 4 parts to it. Yeah, so they can. You can request to return to brick and mortar really at the semester break. Again, if we have the room in the brick and mortar schools, we'll do that. I think most people know this by now, but we're using brick and mortar allocations to fund this school. Right, as of right now, we've got 13,000, I think, students registered for the virtual program. And so we'll be pulling some of those teachers, obviously, to work in the virtual program. So we have to have room back in the brick and mortar to move back. So, yes, we can request that move. And certainly with space availability, we'll be happy to accommodate that move. And then as far as curriculum assignments to be expected, how many hours, that's going to depend on the student a little bit.
Sure.
Sitting in front of the computer, again, depending upon the child and how quickly, or, some subjects may be a little longer, depending upon what their strength is. But we would be, for younger grades, again, we're going to minimize that screen time. So for live sessions, they may be on a total of maybe an hour a day with the teacher throughout the day. Smaller chunks, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here throughout the day. And then as you go up with the older kids, students may need a little bit more time with those teachers on live sessions, or even individual work with teachers as they get into the middle school and high school level.
Okay.
And let's see. Students can choose what time to do their schoolwork. Yeah, so as long as, again, if they could, in elementary, if they could hit that reading block, because that's such a specified block, that would be great. Outside of that, technically, a child could watch their math lesson at 8 o'clock at night and then do the work from the math lesson at that time if that's best for them. And we know that happened a lot in e-learning. A lot of kids were working from middle and high from 9 to 1 o'clock in the morning, and that,
right.
That's fine. But the live lessons, which we would emphasize the students should attend if they need help and need those live lessons, would be during the day.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Traci, it was stated that career centers would have to meet in person. If we are in hybrid mode, do those students still go to 5 days a week, or only the day they're assigned to be at the school? And then what about the transportation to career centers for virtual students?
So right now, on the hybrid model, if they're only attending 1 day a week, then they would do the career center 1 day a week as well.
Okay.
And so that transportation would take them one way or the other. If they have an AM career center block, they would be able to catch the bus at their bus stop, ride to the school, and then from the school to the career center.
Right.
At noon, they would be riding back to the school, and of course, there are no buses riding at noon back to the homes, and so at that point in time, they would need to get transportation back home, or vice versa. If you have an afternoon class, you'd have to get to the school so that bus could take you to the career center.
Jeff, let's take just a quick breath here. Let me check the time, because I don't want to keep you past your allotted time here. Let's see, because we also want to. So we have about 10 more minutes. So I want to encourage. I'm saying this because I want to encourage parents. We have about 10 more minutes of questions for Jeff McCoy, who's obviously talking about academics. And then we're going to hear from Traci Hogan, who is really our in-house expert on all things special education. And a lot of the questions I've heard in that realm, I mean, it's just the nature of it, but they're so specialized. That Traci is absolutely the perfect resource to get those questions answered. So in about 10 minutes, we'll hear from her. So I wanted to give parents that little heads up here and also check the time. So let's continue. Lori has a question. Can you please tell me how the plan will affect senior career center students that are supposed to be working in industry this year? And will that even ever happen this year? So
we certainly hope that will still happen. Certainly, a lot of that's going to depend on the industry,
right.
And what companies are still allowing kids to come in or not come in, or if that industry is even operating at full capacity or not. So our career center staff is working, our career office is working with those industries now to figure out what that might look like. But that would certainly be our intention if the parents are okay and the kids are okay with going into those industries still, and the industries are willing to accept them in on that work, then we certainly want that to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Pamela has a question. Now, and by the way, we're going to now talk a little bit about absences. This is under that heading here. Will the 10 days of absences rule the parents are familiar with still apply for the 2021 school year?
So as of right now, it does. We're still under the state. That comes from the state.
Okay.
The attendance guidelines come from the state. And so we are still required to track attendance of students. And part of that is also so we don't, students don't disappear, so to speak, into the system. So we want to make sure we're making contact with them every day and we're seeing them every day, where they're logging in and working every day. So unless the state would change that attendance requirements, we would still be under the 10 days.
Okay, good. If a child becomes sick and needs to be removed from school, how will they be required to make up work, and what are the attendance rules for missed days and makeup work, and what are the guidelines for returning?
So it'd be very similar to what it is now. As far as the makeup days go, typically that's going to be a day per, per sick that you're out, that you're going to have to make up that work. Every teacher works with students differently, depending upon what they missed while they were out.
Right.
That would be the same for virtual, just notifying the teacher that they're going to be out for that day for virtual, so the teacher can make sure they work with them to get that virtual work made up. As far as returning, there really would be no guidelines for returning unless students had to go out because of some sort of positive test or suspected positive test, and there may be some documentation required for returning to make sure that everything's clear.
Sure, and parents, we put out the full plan this morning, and it has a lot of detail in there about that in case you want to refer to it later. So be sure to check your roadmap plan for the reopening of schools. Now, here's another question. Is it possible that the district could require virtual learning for all students if these COVID-19 rates continue to rise?
So certainly, really, that's what's on the plan as far as the zero attendance days is really that everybody is in fully learning. We still have our virtual program that's operating, but certainly on the attendance plan, a 0 day would mean the rest of the district is also in e-learning fully at home.
Okay. Do we have enough substitute teachers to deal with absences? And then part two of the question, will subs be provided a training before school and follow what they do?
So substitutes, we always have a challenge with substitutes, finding enough substitutes, depending upon the day of the week too. It just depends on what it is. Our HR department now is working through our sub list to make sure people on the list are still wanting to work and still planning on working in this current environment. And as far as, I forgot the second part of that question, Ms. Artis there, but...
are you going to provide training?
So we provide training for subs initially when they first come on board. It'll look a little different in the virtual environment. We will be training a cohort of subs for just virtual environment alone, because that is a very different environment. Just in case the teacher has to go out on maternity leave or they're out sick for several weeks, then we have somebody that can step in who understands the virtual environment and can teach in that environment as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. Megan has written in a question, and thank you, Megan. She writes, if I end up doing a homeschool program and then decide it's not quite right for us, are we able to re-enroll them before the end of the semester?
So yes, you can re-enroll if you do a homeschool program or go to another school outside of our district. You can certainly re-enroll. Entry into the virtual program will be based on our space availability at that time, whether we have the space to put you in the virtual program. But you certainly can re-enroll if you leave us.
All right, here's a question we have heard a bunch of times. Will middle and high schoolers change classes? And I guess we're talking about those who select the traditional in-person instruction.
So for high school, certainly high school is going to have to change classes because, as most people know, that high school does not move in cohorts. Unlike middle school that's teamed, high schools move within a class of 30. You might have kids going 30 different directions for their next class. And so it's not possible to put those in a cohort all day in a classroom and teachers rotate in and out. So high school will have to change classes. Middle school, there is some. We can minimize some of those class changes. Again, the challenge becomes we've got 3 levels of math in 6th grade and 3 levels in 7th and 3 levels in 8th. And so trying to put those groups together, and so the same kids that may take honors math don't take honors English. And so, again, when you start throwing in those different levels, it gets very difficult to try to keep the same cohort together all day long.
Let me ask you one quick question as my own question. I've had the opportunity recently to speak to a couple of teachers and principals, and I think like everybody in the world, we're all wondering, what's this going to look like when everything goes into practice? You speak to a lot of teachers. Even with COVID-19, do you find that there's still a lot of excitement that this challenge is bringing?
Well, I think certainly there's a lot of teachers who did an amazing job in e-learning. I think all of our teachers made a huge shift and did a great job with what we could do in the spring. I think we have a lot of excited teachers who have applied to teach in the virtual program. We're very excited about that, teaching in the virtual program. Certainly, I think none of us as teachers want to not have our kids every single day in the classroom, but we also care about their safety and making sure that our adults are protected. Our adults who are teaching the children, we have to have someone up there teaching the students too, and if they're all sick, we can't do that. So I think, just like always, teachers will do an amazing job coming back to school, and they'll do an amazing job in whatever environment we happen to be in.
Absolutely. I guess, is this one more question here? Then we have about 3 more minutes. Will the related arts teachers go to the students' classrooms, or will the children move?
So that's probably going to depend on the schedule that we follow. If we're on a 1 or 2 day attendance week, you've got much smaller groups of children in classrooms, so it's much more possible to have the students to be able to move in the building and not be in close proximity to each other. Right. But we're going to look at that each time. Every schedule we are following, depending upon what schedule, depend on how we make that that change.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Leslie has written in with a question. Are the schools doing anything for the students that should have been able to get their driver's course during actual school time, like doing an online course?
Yeah, so we're still offering the classroom part of driver's ed, whether it be virtual or online. We're still offering that to students. Like this spring, though, we may have to delay the actual driving portion of that until we are safe to do so with a kid and teacher in a car under the right precautions. So we're still offering that. Many of the schools maybe choose to push their driver's ed off until the spring, when hopefully we're maybe a little further out of this. But yeah, certainly we can still do the online and virtual driver's ed coursework.
Great answer. Great question. Dorsey has written in, if a child has a lottery spot at a choice school for the coming school year, will they lose that spot the following year if they opt for the connections for online learning in 2021?
So parents will keep their lottery and choice slots as long as they are attending a school in Greenville County. Okay. Or if you come over to virtual school, Greenville County virtual program, obviously that's still operating within Greenville County. Schools like Connections Academy, K-12 Academy, those are not Greenville County schools, so you are unenrolling from the school district when you go to one of those places, so you would lose your lottery choice or magnet slot.
Great. What about fall and winter break, and for that matter, spring break? Any clue at this point if we're going to have those?
Yes, so the calendar is still going to continue just as is. We've adjusted obviously for the 1 week start late. So we've adjusted that, and everything else on the calendar will remain the same based on the one that was released. I think is either today or Friday.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And Sean has a question. If school were to start tomorrow. And I have been asked this question over and over and over, and I know you have. If school were to start tomorrow, what plan would we be on?
Well, that's a decision that the larger administration makes. As a senior body, we make that collectively, not individually. So I would not say right now what plan would we be on, because that's, like I said, that's a senior leadership. We have that discussion, even having that discussion even now for the start of school. And as soon as we know, we'll put that out to parents.
And just to reiterate, it's going to be based on a number of factors, not just COVID-19 spread rate, but how it's trending.
Correct.
And there could be other unrelated factors influencing that.
Absolutely.
So it's not like you could tape a chart to your fridge and be able to always say what's going to happen. It's more complicated than that. Will there still be Meet the Teacher nights, and will students just go to the first day? So what happens there?
We are still going to do a Meet the Teacher. It'll probably be virtual Meet the Teacher nights, and so we're still going to do those virtual Meet the Teachers. Having a Chromebook is critical for that for a lot of our students who may not have access to do that at home on a device, and so we certainly are going to still offer those. It's just going to look a little different than it did in the past years.
Okay, and make sure your student is enrolled, especially 5 years old. I'm going to guess we're out of time for Jeff McCoy. You did a fantastic job, as always, answering a lot of questions, a wide variety of things. And are you feeling pretty good about things? You've had a full summer of work putting a lot of this together.
We'll be ready to open school, yeah.
That sounds good. Jeff, thank you. I appreciate that. If you want to unhook your mic, and then Traci Hogan is here waiting in the wings, and Traci is going to talk about really all things special education. So we'll pull the switch here. By the way, we all know each other and work with each other, so we're socially distanced, or best we can be right now. Thank you again, Jeff. I appreciate it. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Can you have a necklace there. Can you maybe just clip it? Yeah, right in there. Oh, dress. Perfect. Okay. You've done this before?
Wow. See if I can get it.
You'll get it. You want me to help?
No, I got it.
Okay.
I got it.
Perfect.
Good.
Excellent. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Traci, we have parents watching right now, and we've talked about the fact that you're really our special education specialist, if you will. What is your title?
Assistant Superintendent for Special Education.
So this is your world. This is your domain. Given COVID-19 and all of this disruption to school and everything, what question do you just get most often, do you think?
Well, I think the question that we get all the time is, can students with disabilities learn outside of a physical school building?
Yeah.
And can those IEPs be met the way that they were written? And I think it's important for us to remember that the law that gives us IEPs, the IDEA, was generated in 1975. So it wasn't really designed for a pandemic. It wasn't designed for all of the situations that we're in.
Sure.
But we certainly have created methods. We have created ways to really do differently than what we did in the spring. I came in on the end of Mr. McCoy, and I know that we was Friday the 13th when we were here talking about it, and we closed on a Sunday and didn't come back on Monday. And folks are very concerned that the spring, what we did, is not going to be the same in the fall. And we've done a lot of planning for that, and I think we have some good information that we can give folks about how we're going to run the IEPs and how we're going to provide their services for our students.
Quite honestly, there's been a lot of innovation in what you do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Teachers were amazing in the spring, and they have continued to study and be very supportive. And they also are, our parents have always been our partners. They've been a part of our individualized education program teams. We have depended on them in meetings to help us plan for the school year when we're in a building. And so they also have been, an incredible support for us as we plan for the fall too.
So one thing I talked about, and at least it's been my experience, is when we talk about special ed, a lot of the questions are very specialized, very specific. So Leah has written in the first question here, and Leah says, my student has an IEP. I saw in the frequently asked questions that students will be able to continue with their IEP for virtual learning. So the question is, will they be working with the IEP team from their choice school so they can return in 2021 where they're familiar with those teachers?
Certainly, and that's an excellent question. If a family chooses to enroll their child in our virtual program, we will hold an IEP meeting to talk about how things will be different. They've chosen a different learning environment for their child. So our plan that we created for their child in our brick and mortar building will need to change. And so a team will meet, and what we will do is everything in our power to include someone who is familiar with that student, which would be the teacher from this past year. We will likely be holding virtual IEP meetings, so it will be easy for them to be a participant in that team. So it is a plan that we would have the previous teacher that worked with a student from that school be a part of this situation.
And we're talking about IEPs, and somebody has written in, how do they get an IEP before the start of school? Is there enough lead time for that?
Certainly. Every year, whether we start traditionally or if we have to start virtually, we have an opportunity where we will have to meet with families and look at IEPs. We do that all the time. What we say is contact your school. The principal will work with the special ed teacher who is assigned for that student to set up an IEP meeting. We typically start those when teachers come back onto contract. I think this year we have some additional days that we'll be working with some teachers that will be here for additional support for kids, at least in the elementary level. So we have some days that we'll be adding those meetings just as we would have in the past.
Good,
so
good.
Contact the school.
Yeah, great. Here's another question. My child has an IEP. Will she have more assignments and meets to keep up with than a child who doesn't, with the way it's worded? So can you, I'm not sure if I really read that clearly, but
I think I understand.
Okay.
So
Give it a shot.
I think the question is about if a child has an IEP and they have their set classes, there are times they're going to meet with their classroom teachers.
Sure.
But then they have a special education teacher who supports them. And maybe when they're in the brick and mortar building, they go to that teacher's classroom and they get additional support. So at home, it might sometimes feel like they have extra work if they are doing things to support something from the classroom. It is never the intention for a student with a disability to have more or extra work.
Sure.
We certainly want the teachers to work together so that they would be able to support the student to access their general education classroom. There may in fact be, though, just as Mr. McCoy talked about, a typical schedule, and they were following a typical schedule where they were, if they were in the building and they went to their class with a special education teacher, they may also have a meet with a special education teacher at that time.
I had a feeling you would know exactly what they were saying in the question, because you've been down that road before. So,
Sure.
What are you planning on doing for extra precautions for both 504 and IEP students?
Well, I think it's important to know, we have about 11,800 students who are on individualized education programs.
Okay.
So to talk about students with disabilities, that's a vast continuum of services that we provide, a huge variety of services. Students that are served on 504 plans typically need accommodations to help them access the general education classroom. So when we talk about precautions, that's a huge, I don't know of things that would need to be separate for students with disabilities. We are going to have masks, that we are requiring masks for grades 2nd and above for all students. We certainly recognize our younger students, our 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, kindergarten,
Sure.
1st grade, and some of our students in our special needs classes will need assistance or need training in that. We're going to need to teach a lot of students about social distancing. We'll have visual cueing throughout the building, but that is something that not just kids with disabilities will be doing, a lot of that, and doing that for all students.
Great answer. Sarisha has a question. My child has special needs. Is there any possibility for him to have brick and mortar method of teaching at least 2 days a week?
When we started this conversation, I mentioned the law that protects students with disabilities or provides service for them. It's called the Individualized Education Improvement Act. And that first word being individual. So every one of the students that is in special education or receives special education services, a team of people meet and decide what's best for that student. So it's hard for me to answer that question about whether a student would get something specific or different, because it is very individual. There are students that we are going to allow for if we are on different plans, okay? So Mr. McCoy referenced the 0 plan, which means we're not in school any day.
Sure.
So certainly students with disabilities would be home as well. For the students that, or for the plan that has 1 or 2 days, students that are in what we call a self-contained classroom typically, where they have more intensive needs, they spend the majority of their day in special education. At elementary and the middle school level, they would be able to come 2 days a week. So they would be on the 2-day plan if the district were on the 1-day plan. The question left, so I don't know the name of the child or the parent that asked that question.
Sarisha, I believe.
It would depend on if Sarisha's child was in one of those classes, so there is the possibility of that, and that's something, again, I think if you contact the principal,
Sure.
they can help you understand whether that would be the case. I would like to add, Mr. Waller, that I think a lot of people believe that our special education classes are very small, and so that if we are on a plan of 1 or 2, that all students in that special education class should be able to come to school because the classes are smaller. That is not the case in every classroom, and certainly that is not a case across the district. So what we have done is really look at, that's how we came up with the 2 days for the self-contained classrooms. Our principals actually measured classrooms. They put out desks and tried to figure out how many students could be there and be safely socially distanced, and that's how we were able to come up with that. So they've done a lot of work.
Yeah, they have. I saw one of those classrooms yesterday, and a person can envision what desks or tables 6 feet apart looks like, but when you see it, you're like, wow, this is really happening, and it's going to be interesting in the fall to see how it all works.
Sure.
Great.
Sure.
Blythe has written in a question. If we need to homeschool our child with an IEP and have special permission to be at another school, will they lose that special permission if we take him out for just this year?
It's an interesting question, and Blythe, if Blythe means would they be in the virtual school, If they choose to be in our Greenville County virtual program, they would not lose their slot. However, if they were homeschooling, they would be withdrawing their student from Greenville County, so they would have the potential to lose their slot.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Sometimes those words get used interchangeably, and Mom might not have meant it that way.
Right. So Nicole, thank you for your question. How can IEPs be upheld? And should we choose to sign up for virtual classes? And will paper copies of work be an option for children?
Okay, let me read the multiple parts of this. So how can IEPs be upheld? I think that's a very consistent question. I think people just can't always see that their child who is struggling can be able to access their education virtually. And so certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we will have meetings. There will be teams that will talk about what your child will need. If a family does not choose virtual, but if we are on a 0 plan, a 1 plan, or a 2 plan, so any of the hybrid models or a 0 plan, we do have a process that we have created where a team will talk about a contingency plan. So parents will be a part of planning for their child's time at home. This is something that we were not able to do in the spring, that is new for us this fall. The parents will be a part of talking about what the general education classroom will look like for their child, what the special education services would look like. Are there goals on the IEP that we would want to continue if they were home for 9 weeks? Are there goals that we would want to wait and look at later? But it really is a contingency plan where the team will have an opportunity to talk about this different learning environment. And again, we didn't have that in the past. And so that piece, so how can IEPs be upheld? It'll really be a process of the team talking about what does your child need in this new learning environment and coming up with the methodology for that. The second part that said, should we enroll in virtual? I can't really, that's certainly a family decision, an individual decision. We will be offering services, but as Mr. McCoy said multiple times, I think we all prefer and believe that in-person education, and certainly the title of our documents, everything, our destination, our roadmap, we're trying to get back to 5 days a week. We just know there are things that we have to do in the meantime to be safe with our students. I think the last part of Nicole's question was about paper copies.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that that may have come from a younger student where we had some packets earlier on in the school year. But we also do have students that require just to be able to hold the physical documents, to be able to highlight, to be able to take notes. Certainly if that's an accommodation in the student's IEP, when the team talks, we will figure out as a district how we can support students in that way.
That's great. You answered the question. Thank you. How will it be communicated to parents what school will look like for students with accommodations that you were talking about?
Students can get accommodations on a 504 plan or an IEP, okay? And so the process really will be very similar in the sense that, again, there will be a meeting to discuss it. If we're talking about a contingency plan, so a parent enrolls in traditional, they're planning traditional, there will be a phone call to them. The special education teacher or the case manager at the school will talk to them and say, if we come back on 1 day, or we can't come back, or we come back on 2 days, this is what we're proposing. And you know, we've done a lot of these meetings through Google Meets, and so we have the parent virtually right there. We can show them the document, we can email it to them through secure measures, and they can take a look at it, and we can talk about it and say, there's a box we've added for what parent training do you need, what parent supports do you need, is there any technology support that you need? And so we'll really address it through that. I think that the question probably comes from in the spring where folks just went home and then they didn't know about the accommodations, and if they didn't have a meeting, they weren't certain that that was happening.
Sure. Yeah.
My advice would be, if you have any concerns about whether your child is getting the services that were outlined in their IEP or their 504 as we move into the fall, contact your school. And we can set up a meeting. Certainly the principal and the special education teacher there are the folks that would really help make that happen the fastest. But if you have any concerns, do that then, don't wait. Because we certainly want to know about what your concerns are.
Yeah, great, absolutely. What will be done, since there is already a shortage of classrooms at school, for self-contained classrooms that are already smaller than other classrooms?
You know, I think that question kind of goes back to where I mentioned earlier about schools doing their facility review. We've asked them to kind of do what we called a capacity review. I think probably whoever wrote that question, that school may have a particular situation, but we have about 100 locations in Greenville County. So there may not be a shortage of classrooms in other places. And they're not all smaller in all of our schools. It really just depends on what type of class. And certainly the principal is charged with knowing their facilities, and whatever attendance plan that we come on, you know, if students are coming on the 1 or 2 day plan, we've done that so that we can socially distance, so that we have the physical space to have the capacity to have the students there. They may not be in the classroom that they were in last year, but the principal will have worked through that and have a plan for those students.
Great, absolutely. How will IEPs be handled? Will those students have extra meetings which could cause more stress for everybody?
Well, let's see. How would IEPs meetings be handled? The actual document, there's two portions when we're talking about an IEP. There's the compliance piece, which I call the paperwork, the meeting, the planning for the student. And then there's the instruction piece, which is what is the teacher going to do, how are they going to work with the student and the family to make sure that the child has access to general education and meets the goals and everything that's in their plan. For the actual meeting to create the paperwork, to create the program, we have done those through Google Meet. Is what we used in the spring, and what we will continue to use in the fall if we are not able to be in person. Certainly, there are times where we have needed to have a meeting in person, and we will need to make sure that we socially distance if there's something that we can't do virtually. But the meetings themselves we anticipate that they would be held virtually. I lost the second part of the question. Sorry about that. As far as causing more stress, well, we will do everything in our power to minimize the stress. I certainly am a huge advocate of making sure parents and families have a draft of any version that we're going to be talking about prior to a meeting. Again, we can send that to them through secure email, and so making sure they have their email up to date so we can communicate with them, making sure that they have an active backpack account so that we can communicate with them through that as well. If they have any questions about, sometimes I think the stress might be from the technology, if they're not familiar with doing virtual meetings, and we have talked people through that. We've had some families say, can you talk to us on FaceTime? I know how to FaceTime, and so we have been able to do that. But I think that the teachers have done an amazing job knowing their audience. And we just need parents to continue to be very open and say, hey, I've got a challenge with this, and we're going to do our best to work through it.
Yeah, no, great. How will this look for at-home virtual, do you recognize the next word?
Yeah, special education students.
Okay, special ed. Operator errors, just overlook me. So special ed high school students. Let me say that again. Now that I've utterly confused our audience. How will this look for the at-home virtual special ed high school students?
And, you know, this is kind of like earlier when I was saying, there's a ton of variety at high school. I mean, we have students with disabilities who receive all of their education in their general education classroom. So when Mr. McCoy talked about a day at a high school where there would be lessons and a schedule at a certain time, but they'd also be recorded, that would be the same thing would be true for a student with a disability. They can access them the exact same way. So their day would look the same as it would as far as the schedule with a brick and mortar. We do have students that have more services in special education, and their special education teachers will have the same things. There will be schedules for those students. They will be tape recording those lessons as well. I do think sometimes our students who, whether elementary, middle, or high, who receive predominantly special education services, parents are worried about the time and how long they will sit in front of the computer, and will they be able to do the intensity of, you know, we're not envisioning them sit in front of a computer for 6.5, 7 hours a day. Much like Mr. McCoy described, whether it's general education or special education, there'll be a lesson, there may be activities, you come back. But the teachers who would be teaching those students who would be predominantly in special education, they're experts in special ed. They know how to teach something in a different way. And so the students in their classroom are in their classroom because they didn't learn the same way their peers did. for a variety of reasons, but the special education teachers are constantly coming up with new ways and different ways, because what works for one student doesn't work for another, and they'll be doing the same thing virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. There are minutes set for grade levels for how long a special ed class would meet on Google Meet. Is this based per day or based per academic subject?
It is based, those are recommendations, and that is based on academic subject per subject. And we came up with that because in the spring, when we had a very short amount of time and it was crisis, we didn't really have a clear expectation set for everything that we wanted the teachers to do. So we have outlined many of those things for the fall. And yes, it is by academic period, but certainly if there's a student that, because of their disability, is not capable of doing that, again, that team will talk and plan for that student and be able to make adjustments.
Yeah. I guess we're almost out of time. Is there anything that hasn't been asked that, while we've got a couple of minutes, you know, this keeps showing up on your radar over and over and over?
And I don't recall that we talked a lot about masks. I do get a lot of questions about how to help my child wear a mask. I get a lot of families that say my child is not going to be able to wear a mask.
Great question. Yeah.
I will tell you that I feel very strongly that all of our children follow our model, and I think we have to start with that. But I also try to take it like glasses or a hearing aid. I don't think any of us plan for our children to have some of those things, and they're awkward and they're different when you first get them. But typically you get a wearing schedule and you work at building that up. And we help, I think about, I remember getting my glasses, and I remember my mom letting me get a Holly Hobby sticker on it. And I think that all of those same things are true about a mask. You want to let the children pick out a mask. You want to let them, you want to have a schedule just like when you trained them to go to the bathroom. You took them and you practice, you wear your mask for a little bit of time, you reinforce and say great job with the mask. And all of those things, if you can do those now, they will help us very much for the fall. It will take one thing off of the teachers, who will be working very hard for a lot of things with your students. But I also think the social distancing, we're seeing that everywhere we go. Whether you're at Target or the grocery store, it's not uncommon to see people in a mask and the signs that say stand here. And I think pointing those out to your children and practicing and explaining that we want to keep everybody safe and this is why we're doing this. But any help that we can get on the front side of that, preparing students for that, is just like you'd prepare your kids for coming to kindergarten or for coming to school. We just have some new rules that we need to put in place.
Those are such great points. I'm glad you said that. And you're right. There are many opportunities, whether you go into the grocery store or wherever, to look down and see the stickers on the floor and so forth. That's a great bit of advice.
If we have time, I could offer one other thing
love it if you did.
That we've been offering parents when they call. I do think that our different schedules of the 0, the 1, the 2, the hybrid makes people really uncomfortable for a variety of reasons. But I think all children need consistency, and we know that.
Right.
So knowledge is power. If we know in advance, we're certainly going to tell you everything that we know so that families can be prepared. But I'm a huge believer for all kids in a schedule. I would bet everybody watching probably uses a planner or a schedule of some type. So I would strongly recommend creating some visual schedules so that folks know what's coming up for the week. If you're going to be in school on one day, this is your day, but this is what's going to happen on the other days. Because really what makes it consistent is the whole week plan. Doesn't have to be that they come in our building every day. The next day on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday may be exactly the same, and we can show the consistency there. But we do different things with our children on weekends. And so I think we have different ways that we plan for that, and I think giving that some thought, every family would have to do it differently, certainly, and I'm not at all implying that it's easy.
Sure.
And certainly if you have a lot of children that you have to plan for, I think that's very difficult. But again, knowledge is power, and if the parents are uncomfortable and they can figure out a structure to be able to visually show a child, that is power to the child too, as far as the consistency. So anything that we can do there, or that parents can do there, I think will be very helpful and make those first days in particular very successful. I think most of us are very worried about those first days. We always want our kids to have great opportunities at school and a great experience at school, But the first days in particular, I think, are so incredibly important for the lay of the land.
So even though everyone here, all of our superintendents are utterly exhausted after a summer of hard work and planning, are you all fired up? You ready to go for fall?
I will tell you, I think we're all very excited.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we didn't go in this business because we thought it was easy.
Right.
I think we all like working with people, but I would think that the other thing that is is very much a core part of us is that we're problem solvers. And this is just, again, I don't want to minimize it, but it's another problem. And
right.
We're going to figure out the best way, and we figure out a plan that works for the majority of the students, and then we work and tweak the students who have special needs. So,
Traci Hogan, based on what I've heard here, I think you've accomplished that, and I know it'll be little improvements as you go along as we enter the new school year. Thank you.
Thank you.
For being here with us. Now, I want to mention we have more Facebook Live opportunities coming up the rest of this week, actually tomorrow, Wednesday, and then Thursday. So just the quick rundown, tomorrow at 2 p.m., same time, we're going to have someone here, our medical services director, to really talk about children in school in this period of COVID-19. You know, what about masks? What about temperature checks? Who does what? What about symptoms that children may feel and so forth? She can talk about all of that stuff. So parents have questions regarding that. Also, at 2:30 tomorrow, so we're doing these back-to-back Q&A sessions. We're going to have someone here from our transportation department to talk about the bus ridership situation. That's been a huge question for all of our students who ride buses. What's that going to look like when they get on the bus? And then Thursday at 2 p.m., the person who's over all of our facilities. What about disinfecting surfaces, keeping desks clean, air systems? How do we keep fresh air moving through the physical plants that we know as schools and so forth? All of these great questions that parents have had, we're going to have the people who can absolutely answer them. And Traci, let me refer to the email address that I can give people if they, you can either leave a question on the Facebook account here for us. We check those. We also have info line at greenville.k12.sc.us. So you remember the last part. It's the usual Greenville County Schools address, but info line if you need assistance or want to call customer service or have a question for us. Thank you again. I enjoyed it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time. And by the way, as with any Facebook Live, if you just came in at the very end or you heard about this from a friend, you can watch it now anytime later on your smartphone or computer. Have a great day, everybody.